or we. It's the university that wants its members to follow a certain policy, not the other way around. She has, in effect, anthropomorphized, good old gray mass, the organization. She's made it a person, as if it had a human form. By doing so, she has implicitly, notice, also established a hierarchy of actants. I think Anne has hit upon the defining characteristic of organization, a skewed distribution of authority that makes one actant, the organization, one up, to use an old expression borrowed from Václav Bevan and Jackson, I think probably Bateson originally, while others, namely the people who work for the organization, are one down. Think of a soldier in the army. He or she executes the orders of superior officers. They, in turn, express the intention of their commanders, who, in turn, represent the army, which is also a wing of government and supports the commander-in-chief, the civilian who heads up the government. And in theory, he channels the will of the people. The responsibility for deciding keeps being pushed upward en amont, with the consequence that the delegation of authority is pushed further and further downward en aval. The resulting disconnect is well documented historically in its effects. On the one hand, what might be called the post-World War II Nuremberg effect. I only did what I was told, so therefore I'm innocent. On the other hand, the Abu Ghraib syndrome, where no one above the rank of sergeant was ever indicted on the grounds that the abuses were due to a few bad apples, those who exceeded their authority. Why do we humans do this? Since the implication, as Stan Dietz has reminded us often, is the inequality of agencies that is an open invitation to abuse. Here's where I think we can really put Bruno Latour's incisive analysis to work. Bruno's point is that any actant is a hybrid construction. One of his ways to illustrate the hybrid character of acting has been to refer, Linda mentioned this earlier too, to the endless debate in North America about the need for government action to control the sale and distribution of handguns. Advocates of total absence of regulations like the National Rifle Association contend that guns don't kill people, people do. Those who favor gun control argue roughly the opposite, that it's the widespread availability of guns that explains the extraordinarily high rate of murders in the United States compared with countries that have more restrictive legislation. Actor network theory argues that it's neither the gun in isolation nor the shooter who's the actant. It's the fusion of shooter and gun that is enabled to act and makes the gun an expression of attitude. Others are surreptitiously being enabled, of course. Legislators, lobbies, gun manufacturers, merchants associations, and so on. Now let's look at a different case, that of the organization. Who is the it that is insisting on the need to teach composition in Anne's example? The university, obviously. Well, how do we describe the actant in that case? If we take actor network theory logic to heart, we'd have to say that the university as actant is born in the fusion of university and teacher, not to mention a few other things like classrooms, textbooks, alumni, departments of education, and of course a few students. The university cannot act on its own because it's not that kind of entity. It's not a person, it's not an actor, it's an actant. It is not going to be doing the teaching itself because it can't. On the other hand, the teachers are actors, but they are also become actants. They are university teachers. So far, so good, but there's a little problem if we take the Gray-Mass definition of actant seriously. Remember, for it to be an actant, it must be a member of the class that he called, in his jargon, anthropomorphic. It must have human characteristics. It's too big a stretch, what do you think, to attribute intrinsic feelings, desires, and attitude and intention to the rifle that locked up on the gun rack on the wall. To paraphrase Van Vuren and Coran again, it's a little hard to claim that it was the gun's attitude that made it do what it did. It's the person with the gun in his or her hand that is the anthropomorphic attitude. The gun's a means, an agency, a transmitter of attitude, but this is not where the attitude originated. To use Gibson's famous term, it's an affordance. The case of organization, I agree, is different from the gun. It too is an entity in a way. I think Anne Nicotera is right, but it's not like the gun. We easily and daily attribute anthropomorphic characteristics to it without anyone blinking an eye. In a paper, when I was writing this, I read, for example, on page 1 alone, Washington has snubbed Ottawa. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has announced talks. It has chosen Australia over Canada. It does not want to try forging an agreement. That the world's biggest banks have rebuffed calls for stricter rules, and it goes on and on and on. We constantly attribute attitude to organizations. But therefore, organizations are actants in a way that objects like guns are not. In the case of organizations, it's the people who represent them, who represent the organizations, who are the affordances. This is true even though there is no real identity, and here I'm in total agreement with Bruno, that we can ever point to it and say, that's it, there is the organization. Unlike the gun, it is an entirely fictitious, totally immaterial construction. It just happens, however, that it is a powerful actant because we attribute an attitude to it, like we do with signs. An organization, in other words, has many heads and multiple hands, but no mind of its own, and assuredly no heart. It's the Leviathan. Why do we need organization? Very simply, because the existence of organization lends to our own actions as its representative agents a greatly increased power to exert an influence on the world. Because those teachers Anne was overhearing represented the university, they could count on access to classrooms, all the accoutrements that go with them, libraries and bookstores, and so on. They had acquired a prestige, a status, and an identity that enabled them to function effectively in their relations with peers, with students, with administration, with others in non-university communities. There are other rewards, of course, like a salary. There is, however, a price to be paid for this delegation of attitudes to another entity that we've invented through our own communicative practices. In doing so, we have incarnated a relationship of authority where our own intentions and attitudes have to take the back seat. But the reward for us is an enhanced authority, identity, and prestige in dealing with other non-organizational persons. This is considerable, even at the cost of becoming ourselves one down within the organizing context itself. It's a curious kind of trade-off that we humans seem to have invented. It's a deal we have naturalized most blatantly by